Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in this video, I'll be showing you a few awesome builds that I've made over the last few months, all focused on what I have to say is my favourite weapon in the game right now, the Ager Scepter. I have covered this in the past. I made a ultimate build for this before, but now I'm making an updated version that's going to show off a few of my favourite builds that I have just been really enjoying. There are two things I want to mention real quick though. One is that I won't be using Whisper of Bonds in these builds. The reason is because it's just not needed. Without this, and without Well of Potency, I can get my super in about 50 seconds, which with the new super changes and the new Ager Scepter change, that's completely fine. If you didn't know, the new super change was that every super takes longer to cool down, or faster to cool down, based on their tiers. And Shadebinder is in tier 5, which means it takes about 8 minutes to recharge on 10 in. But that's completely fine. It literally does nothing for the Ager Scepter build. That's just your base cooldown. Obviously, getting kills and all this other stuff factors into it. We've got absorption cells, we've got all this other stuff, and it doesn't matter. So just ignore that long cooldown. It does not affect the builds in any way, and it also means we still don't need Whisper of Bonds. Now, the Ager Scepter change that I mentioned is that the super drains incredibly slow now. It used to be quite fast, but it was still extremely manageable. But now it's just, it takes ages to go away. Now, the next thing I want to mention is that the first build specifically is focused on a sword, and that sword is not actually out yet. This is the sword I will be focusing on. You have to have this sword on for this build to be effective. So go get yourself a Zephyr after the Dawning's out. It comes out later today, probably when this video is uploaded as well. It will not be out yet. But when the Dawning is out, this will be acquirable, and I'm not sure what perks it has yet, but hopefully it's got something like Whirlwind, because Whirlwind is still phenomenal. And yeah, Stasis Sword, it's going to be great. This is actually an old weapon, if you didn't know. Actually, quite a lot of people probably wouldn't know, but this used to be the 2017 Dawning weapon. It was Arc, Void, or Solar, based on what you changed it to, because you could do that back then. And now it's Stasis, which is perfect for this build. It's also the first Stasis sword, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so I'm just quickly recording this bit after recording the video, because I actually think I forgot to mention it, but my stats. Stats are basically meaningless for the most part, except these three stats right here. You want 100 int, because you want to get your super back fast. You want 100 dis, because you want Glacier Nades back fast. And you want 100 recov for survivability and your rift. Everything else is pointless, nothing else matters in PvE, you do not need strength as much as that would be nice to have, because we have Glacial Harvest, which gives you your melee energy back for every shard you pick up. Now, because we will be constantly freezing things with Agers, we will have plenty of shards to get that back well before those 2 minutes come around. So I just wanted to quickly throw that in here before I actually get into the video and talk about the builds. Let's get into this. Alright, so of course we have the Mantle Battle Harmony, which we're going to be using for fast supers and for an extra damage buff when we hit max super. So yeah, Absorption Cells is literally just get kills with a weapon that matches your subclass and you get more super energy, and then obviously, like I mentioned, when your super is full, you get damage buff. The damage buff is 20%. It does stack with everything. It is not classed as an empowering buff. I'm pretty sure, actually maybe they changed it, but if they did change it, it doesn't matter because we're on Shadebinder, so we don't have anything to empower us anyway. This is our empowerment, and it will work with Zephyr, and it will work with Ager's, so that's already a free 20% damage buff to both of them, which is great. Okay, so for our first mod as well, we also have Elemental Shards, which basically turns Stasis Shards, which we'll be making a lot because we're freezing a ton of stuff with Ager's. It'll turn those into Elemental Wells, and we have quite a few mods that benefit from Elemental Wells, so with this one out of the way, we'll get into the first mod that benefits that, and that is Elemental Charge. Now what this does is when you pick up an Elemental Well, you get 2 stacks of Charge of Light. A lot of people actually kind of don't like this. It is extremely valuable for a mod, and obviously with Elemental Shards it's just that much better. A lot of people still use Taking Charge, but Taking Charge is just a vastly inferior version to Elemental Charge, especially when you're using Elemental Shards. You really do not need Taking Charge at all. It is a complete waste of a mod slot. So if you have Elemental Charge and you're using Elemental Shards, pair them together. Do not use Taking Charge. Alright. Then we have Font of Might, which is probably my favourite mod in here. Basically, when you pick up an Elemental Shard, you get a damage buff to the weapons that match your subclass. In this case, Ager, Scepter, and Zephyr, both Stasis. This is a 25% damage buff, and unlike Mantle, which I'm still unsure if it pairs with other things, this stacks with everything in the game. So this is a flat 25% damage increase to your Stasis weapons, in this case, that will stack with everything. Now this is perfect because our Charge of Light mod of the day is Lucent Blade, which is a 35% damage buff to your sword. And this one does not stack with everything. This does class as an empowering buff, but it is the same as a bubble. So if you're using Lucent Blade, don't use bubble, don't use well. Just slap things with the sword. You get 5 seconds of 35% damage buff for 1 charge, so that's 10 seconds for 2 charges. Now, I will get into the Stasis Super, or the Stasis subclass in a second, but there are ways of maintaining this 5 seconds for a lot longer than intended, and basically just a way to keep charging you while you're doing damage. But we'll get into that soon. So, yeah, of course, Font of Might and Lucent Blade both can stack, which means you have a 60% damage buff to Zephyr, for example, because Lucent Blade only works for swords. So Zephyr will have a 60% damage buff when you're slapping an enemy with the sword. If it can get Whirlwind, that's going to be another 30% on top of that. And if it can get other stuff, I'm not really sure. Maybe Vorpal, that'll be a 10%. Surrounded is like 35% as well. So there's a lot of possibilities with that. And you're really making Lucent Blade and Zephyr worthwhile over maybe a linear fusion or a rocket launcher or something. It's just a really nice way of making a sword viable, because swords are very hard to make viable nowadays. I mean, everyone's just running around with Eager Edge, you know, half truce and the other half. Everyone's just running around with those just for the speed. They're not even using it for an actual sword. So, you know, to make a sword actually worth using, you need these together, and Zephyr is the perfect candidate for that because we have Elemental Shards to maintain Lucent Blade. And it's all just great. It's all really just great. This build is awesome. And then finally I have Particle Deconstruction for the Fusion Rifle for mages and potential boss DPS when a sword is not worth using. So that's the first build out of the way. Now, actually talking about Shadebinder itself, because this is going to stay the same for everything. So I wanted to talk about this after the build and before getting into the other builds, because it's going to be the same. So we have Glacial Harvest, of course, for Stasis Shards. And I have Ice Flare Bolts to basically freeze other enemies and get incredibly powerful ad clear out of Agers. You'll freeze one enemy with Agers, and then Ice Flare Bolts will freeze everything else in the room with just, you know, just that alone. You freeze one enemy, boom, everything in the room's frozen. So, that's awesome. Now, you can use Bleak Watcher to maintain Lucent Blade. The strat for this is that you will throw a Bleak Watcher near you, preferably next to the boss that you're swording. And then Bleak Watcher will tag the boss, freeze the boss, make shards. The shards will fly to you. They'll give you Charge of Light, and you'll get Lucent Blade out of that. And you can basically maintain that for the whole damage phase of whatever you're swording to get permanent Lucent Blade until the damage phase is over, right? Which is awesome. That's phenomenal. So yeah, if you want to use this for boss DPS, you can. But for ad clear, use Ice Flare Bolts. That's kind of like the two main things you should use with Glacial Harvest. Now, for my fragments, this stuff is pretty optional. Of course, you can use Whisperer Bonds, as mentioned. But this is just what I'm using. So Whisperer Chains I have here for the plus 10 recovery, of course. And also because we're going to have permanent resist up. The reason for this is that when you're near a Stasis Crystal or a frozen target, you will have a resistance buff, which will make you harder to kill. Now, the reason why this is permanent is because Agers will freeze everything, as mentioned. Every kill and every tag with the super mode will just freeze an enemy. And that makes you resistant to that enemy when you're near them. Now, because Agers doesn't have that much range, you probably will be near an enemy that's frozen. And you can also just keep an enemy there frozen to get the damage resistance. And yeah, it's just great. It's just free DR, basically. You can't go wrong with that. So next up, I have Whisperer Shards, which is when you shatter a Stasis Crystal, it gives you grenade energy. The reason why I have this is because Glacianades are extremely valuable for boss DPS. Keeping enemies out of a zone, and also keeping yourself safe with the resistance. So I just like having Glacianades up at all times so that I can get out of sticky situations for free and not really have to worry about anything, and then also have some extra DR on top of that. This is optional though. I do recommend running Whisper Endurance if you're going to use Bleak Watcher, because the added slow is just so valuable. But yeah, you can use what you want, honestly. You can use what you want. You could use any of these as well, right? You could use anything. It doesn't matter. Use what you want, but this is just what I like to use. Then we have Whisper of Fissures. Now this is mandatory, of course, because it increases your damage and the size of an explosion when you destroy a Stasis Crystal or a frozen target. This is going to make ad clear incredibly easy, and it's also going to make boss DPS better with the Glacianade, as mentioned before. So yeah, you have to have this. You got to have it on. And then I also have Whisper Conduction, which I would say is mandatory because of the nature of Stasis Crystals and the Elemental Well. Basically, this makes the shards track to you. So, I mean, that's just amazing. You don't actually have to run into them. You can just stay kind of close and they'll just come to you and give you Charge of Light, give you Font of Might, etc, etc. That's great. Alright, so with the subclass out the way and the first build out the way, head into the next build. Okay, so for the second build, you can see here we now have a rocket launcher. Of course, everything is the same for the subclass, don't need to mention that. We've only changed a few mods here and there, but this is kind of like a variant build. You can basically change a couple mods around based on the activity you're doing to benefit from different things. So everything else is pretty much the same here. You can see we have Font of Might, we have Shards, we have a Charge, and we have Particle Deconstruction. But we have a different mod that we're going to be charging ourselves for, and that is Protective Light. So this is kind of like my general end game build. I'll be using a rocket launcher which has incredibly high DPS output. We have Particle Deconstruction Fusion Rifle for also DPS and for mages and stuff. And then I have Agers for ad clear. This build boosts Agers, but it also boosts my DR. This one's basically just, I can use whatever I want with this, pretty much, and not have to worry about anything, right? I don't have to worry about having Argent Ordnance up and all this other stuff. It's just boost Agers, have DR, right? This is kind of like your general all-round build, and Protective Light is just amazing, right? It's just phenomenal. So this is the Protective Light build, very straightforward. There's nothing to show about this. It is basically identical to the last one, except I have Protective Light, and that's that. Alright, and now for the third and final build, one of the strongest so far. This is the double font of might elemental time dilation build that basically enhances Ager Scepter and Reed's Regret for 16 seconds instead of 10 seconds. That is infinitely refreshable. It is incredibly powerful for boss DPS and ad clear, and I highly recommend using this one in endgame content because this is by far the strongest one you can actually go and use, and it's very fun. So, for the mods, of course, we have now changed our charge to elemental time dilation. Now what this does is it will let you stack time limited benefits, which basically just makes them last longer. So Font of Might lasts 10 seconds, and now because I have double Font of Might on with time dilation, it lasts 16 seconds, which is just amazing. Now what this means is that I will be increasing Reed's Regret and Ager Scepter by 25%, and this does stack with Mantlebelt Harmony, which is going to be 45%, and then, for example, Reed's Regret has Fire in Line, which is another 25%, so that's 65%, which is just dumb. Absolutely stupid. Then you put Particle Deconstruction on top of that, which is a debuff, which stacks with all of it, and that is another 40%, I think. Pretty sure it's 40%. So that's 105% damage increase to Reed's Regret. Incredible. It also doesn't include Adept Big Ones, which is, what, 7 point something %? So it's just damage on top of damage on top of damage. You've increased Reed's Regret by over 100%, which is just stupid. And that's pretty much the build. I do have Bleak Watcher on this build because you want to have that damage buff up constantly. For example, on Templar, you'll be doing damage from the bottom of the stairs, for example, and you'll just throw a Bleak Watcher. Ager Shield Guy drops the shield of the Templar. The turret will shoot the Templar, the shards will come to you, and boom, DPS time. You're going to be absolutely annihilating bosses with this. And then you got Cartesian for mages and added boss DPS if you run out of ammo and reeds. It's just great. You've got incredible ad clear, incredible boss DPS, and major destruction-y stuff. It's great. I love it. Very fun. Very powerful. Those are all the builds that I have to show for you today. Probably not going to be any added gameplay other than the super bit I showed at the start, because it's not really necessary. There's nothing really to show that I haven't shown before. So with that, hopefully you enjoyed the video. It's very long, but hopefully you liked it anyway. Hopefully you get something out of this and you enjoy the builds. Let me know what you think of them, and adios.